सभी को नमस्कार, स्वामी जी का स्वागत। On behalf of BITS Alumni Association International, it is our proud privilege to welcome Swami Medhananda for today's discourse. We are grateful to you, Swami ji, for giving your time, and it is indeed an honor for all of us to listen to you. He will be speaking to us on Sri Ramakrishna and Paramahansa Dev and a harmony of religions. The topic could not have been more relevant than what is happening in the world around today. So we are really grateful for choosing that topic, Swamiji. Swamiji will speak for about half the time and thereafter has consented to take on questions. So please type your question in the chat box so that we can manage that smoothly. Swamiji, you will have to pardon our ignorance, although all of us would have studied the life and times of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa in our school, but over the years, over decades, we may not be as familiar with the Vedanta and the philosophy. So kindly ignore our knowledge. May I now request Kashinath to formally introduce Swamiji, and thereafter he will commence his discourse. Kashi, over to you. Kashi, are you there? Kashi, can you hear me? Okay, I'll try to fill in for him. Swamiji, as all of you, we had circulated his brief profile. Swamiji holds a PhD from University of California, Berkeley, and as many of our friends from California are aware, one of the most renowned schools in the United States. He has been, though born in USA, but he has been studying Vedanta and philosophy for all these years. So I can see Kashi has joined. So Kashi, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Namaskar, Swamiji. Namaskar, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome Swamiji to speak to the BITS Pilani alumni. We have worked with Swamiji during the COVID relief program in Mysuru, and thank you for all your support. I have known Swamiji for a number of years, and I want to give a brief introduction to his background. Swamiji did his schooling in Boston, Massachusetts, United States. Then he decided to come to college at the University of California in Berkeley, where he got his bachelor's degree and also master's degree in English, and then decided to pursue his PhD program on German philosophy. So he has studied at UC Berkeley, then he spent time studied at Oxford and also at the Humboldt University in Berlin, Germany. And during a trip to Los Angeles, when we went to visit his parents, I saw Swamiji spend an enormous number of time in learning Hindi as well as Sanskrit, and particularly emphasis on Sanskrit grammar. And also he was narrating the mantras from Upanishads. And he did indicate at that time, at a very early age, that he is moving in the direction of spirituality and sannyas. And sorry, are you able to hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah. And then Swamiji decided that, he wants to move in the direction of spirituality and sannyas. And I just wanted to explain a couple of things. Sorry, there's another presentation also coming in this, which I can't understand. Hers?
Somebody
Yeah.
has pressed the share button. Was it coming?
Yeah, because there is some other presentation that is also coming in.
Yeah, thanks.
So anyway, so I just wanted to explain, somebody explained to me sometimes back the meaning of sannyas, and said that several years back in southern India, Ramana Maharshi was asked, what is sannyas and what is a sannyasi? And then he answered that in two Sanskrit words, nirmalam jnanam, or clear thinking, and or the samyak darsana, or the right seeing. And the best of my knowledge, Swamiji, is about clear thinking and the right darsana. Swamiji then decided to work through Ramakrishna Mission, where he spent a number of years in Belud Math, and he got his, then he was initially called Ayan Maharaj, and then it was Swami Medhananda. And Swamiji always displayed superior intellect, or medha, or chetas, from an early age. And we believe that with his talent and with his energy and with his dedication, I am of the firm belief that he will do immense amount of good to humanity in coming years, particularly with the younger generation, both in India as well as in the US. With that introduction, I would do again namaskar to Swamiji and proceed with his pravachan, please.
Thank you so much to Sri Harsh Bhargav and Kashinath Mitra for the very generous introduction. I'm going to use a PowerPoint presentation. I hope that's okay. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Good. So I'll be speaking today on Sri Ramakrishna and the harmony of religions. It's a topic that's close to my heart, and as Sri Bhargav mentioned, a very, very important topic in these times. So he mentioned that many of you no doubt have heard of Sri Ramakrishna, but you may need a little bit of a refresher on his life and teaching. So let me begin with very basic stuff about his life. So he was born in 1836 and left his body in 1886. He practiced sadhanas in a number of different religious traditions, including Tantra. His first guru was a female guru, Bhairavi Brahman. Very interesting, actually. And she taught him Tantra. And he also practiced Vaishnavism. He practiced Advaita Vedanta under the great sannyasin Totapuri. He also practiced Islam and Christianity. So he's a very unusual mystic in that sense, that he didn't practice one path, but many different paths. And he achieved perfection in all of them. And on the basis of these different religious practices, he had a number of different types of spiritual experiences. He realized God in the form of Allah, in the form of Jesus, in the form of Krishna, Rama, Ramlal, Kali, of course, who is his Ishtadevata. And he also attained oneness with non-dual pure consciousness. When he practiced Advaita Vedanta, he soared into the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi and remained in that state for many days. So he had both theistic and non-theistic types of spiritual experiences. What I mean by theistic is a religion based on the personal God, belief in a personal God, that we can pray to this God, that God responds to our prayers, that there's some difference between us and God. He had those many kinds of experiences along those lines, but he also had non-theistic spiritual experiences, like the experience of Nirvikalpa Samadhi when he was practicing Advaita Vedanta. And it was on the basis of his varied religious practices and his spiritual experiences that he taught the harmony of all religions. One of his famous teachings is, as many faiths, so many paths. In Bangla, Maut Pot. And I want to explain in more detail exactly how Sri Ramakrishna harmonized the different world religions. So to begin with, I thought it would be helpful to bring in a very important classification introduced by the American Christian theologian, Alan Race. He's still living, now he's quite old, but in 1983, he introduced this classification of 3 paradigms for making sense of religious diversity, the fact that there are many different religions in this world. The first paradigm is called exclusivism, religious exclusivism. This is the view that only one religion leads to salvation, the highest good, the highest goal, while all other religions do not lead to salvation. So to give one example, this may not be so familiar to an Indian audience, but he was a Protestant theologian named Karl Barth, and he believed this, that only Protestant Christians will be going to heaven. Everybody else is doomed to go to hell or somehow not achieve salvation. So it's a very narrow kind of paradigm. The second paradigm is interesting. It's a kind of middle paradigm. It's called inclusivism, religious inclusivism. This is a view that only my religion, only one religion leads directly to salvation, but other religions other than my own, lead somehow indirectly to salvation or provide lesser forms of salvation. So the idea here is my religion is the highest, it's the best. Other religions are not totally wrong, but I put them on a lower footing. This is the inclusivist standpoint. This was endorsed by a number of different thinkers. So for instance, Karl Rahner was a famous Catholic theologian in the 20th century, and he taught a Catholic inclusivist view, the idea that Catholicism is the only religion that leads directly to salvation. Other religions, whether they're Hinduism or Buddhism or Judaism or Islam, they help bring us a certain amount of, they can bring us part of the way towards salvation, but they can't bring us to the highest goal in the way that Catholicism can. And Advaita Vedanta, I would classify as, on the Indian side, an inclusivist philosophy. We're going to see why in a bit. In a few slides, I'll explain why I think that Advaita Vedanta is also inclusivist, claiming that Advaita Vedanta is the only path leading directly to salvation, moksha. But that other paths are not wrong, but they're just not, they only lead part of the way. They're preparatory disciplines. And finally, the third paradigm is called religious pluralism. This is the view that more than one religion, multiple religions, equally lead to salvation. You'll notice that it's in this pluralist position that multiple world religions are placed on an equal footing. There's no higher and lower here. Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, they're all equally good, and they're all equally capable of taking us to the same goal of God realization. This view it's become very popular in contemporary philosophy of religion. And 2 of the major thinkers here who defend religious pluralism are John Hick, Paul Knitter. There's another, a German scholar named Perry Schmidt-Leukel. So these are all religious pluralists on the Western side. And on the Indian side, I want to make a case that Sri Ramakrishna is one of the foremost religious pluralists. And not just that if we study his teachings and his life carefully, we can learn a lot about how to develop a really rigorous and fruitful paradigm for harmonizing the world religions and contributing to world peace. So as I mentioned just now, I wanted to first discuss briefly Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, and then I'll move on to compare and contrast Shankara's Advaita Vedanta with Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta. So what is Shankara's Advaita Vedanta? Of course, I hope most of us know that Sri Shankaracharya was an 8th century Indian philosopher. He is famous he was a great sannyasin. He started the Dashanami Sampradaya of sadhus. The Ramakrishna mission is also part of that Dashanami Sampradaya, because as I mentioned earlier, our parampara starts with Totapuri. Totapuri was in the Dashanami Sampradaya. Totapuri was the guru to Sri Ramakrishna, and Sri Ramakrishna had many monastic disciples, and my guru, Swahanandaji, was a disciple of Swami Vijnanandaji, who is a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. So we are all in that same lineage. And what was Shankara's philosophy? He taught Advaita Vedanta. And if you wanted to explain it briefly in a particular formula, this would be the formula. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Naparaha. Brahman alone is real. The world, Jagat, is unreal. And the individual, the Jiva, is none other than Brahman. In a nutshell, this is Advaita. We can unpack this a bit into 5 main doctrines. The first doctrine, the sole reality, the only reality is Brahman, which is understood as non-dual, impersonal, pure consciousness. If any of you have watched Swami Sarvapriyanandaji's videos, I'm sure many of you have, he often teaches this philosophy of Advaita Vedanta. Second doctrine of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, the world, Jagat, the personal God, Ishvara, and individual souls, the different jivas, are all empirically real, but ultimately unreal. See, to understand what this means is, this is slightly technical, Shankara distinguishes 2 standpoints. He distinguishes the empirical standpoint, what he calls Vyavaharika Satta, and the absolute standpoint, Paramatika Satta. And he says that from the Paramatika standpoint, from the absolute standpoint, there's only one reality. That reality is Brahman. But from the empirical standpoint, from the Vyavaharika standpoint, there are 3 entities which are real, at least from the empirical standpoint. Jagat, Jiva, and Ishvara. This world, the God who creates this world and rules this world, and to whom we can pray and who answers our prayers, and all of the different individual souls. Each of you has an individual soul. I also have a different individual soul. All of this is real, but it's not ultimately real. It's real from the Vyavaharika standpoint. Third doctrine, according to Shankara, we attain liberation, which is moksha, liberation from this cycle of rebirth and from suffering, liberation from suffering, by attaining knowledge of our true nature as Brahman. We suffer because we're suffering from an identity crisis, essentially. We mistakenly identify with this body-mind complex, but the moment we realize our true nature as non-dual pure consciousness, we become liberated, we become free from all suffering, and we don't have to come back again and again. Fourth doctrine, Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge, is the only direct path to liberation. I hope this should remind you of the previous slide where I discussed the 3 paradigms. This should begin to remind you of the inclusivist paradigm. And fifth, Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of devotion, and Karma Yoga, the yoga of unselfish works, Nishkama Karma. They lead indirectly to liberation by purifying and concentrating the mind, thereby making us eligible to practice Jnana Yoga. So doctrines 4 and 5 encompass what I call Shankara's inclusivist standpoint. The idea is that only one path, the Advaitic path, the path of Jnana Yoga, leads directly to moksha. Other paths are not wrong, but they only lead us part of the way. So I illustrated that with, one second, how do I, oh, that's too bad. It was supposed to be, sorry, this is meant to be a kind of an animated slide, but I'm gonna have to explain, for some reason it's not working. So I'll just explain this. So basically, this is a mountain. And Christian religious practitioners, through the practice of Christianity, by reading the Bible and by practicing what Jesus taught, they will come up about 75% of the way up the mountain. And the arrow is blocking this, but he will realize the Christian God. He might realize Jesus. He might even go to heaven, but even that Christian heaven is not the highest goal, according to Advaita Vedanta. Ultimately, that Christian has to practice Advaita Jnana Yoga, and only then can he attain the highest goal, which is realization of impersonal non-dual Brahman. So I hope you can see that. I'm sorry, again, because this is meant to be an animated slide, but it's not working for some reason. So through the practice of Christianity, you come up most of the way, but ultimately you have to practice Advaita to attain the highest goal. Likewise for Muslim sadhakas, likewise for theistic Hindus. Theistic Hindus, what I mean by that is the Hindus who believe in a personal God, whether that's Rama or Krishna or Kali. These are all theistic Hindus. So even they, through their practices, they might realize Rama or Krishna or Kali or Shiva, but that's not the highest goal. The highest goal can be attained only by practicing Advaita Jnana Yoga. So I hope this explains in a nutshell why I think Advaita Vedanta of Shankara's variety is an inclusivist paradigm rather than a pluralist paradigm. Inclusivist because Advaita Vedanta is the highest philosophy. Other philosophies, other religions are not wrong, but they're somehow lower. They're lower stages. They don't bring us all the way to the highest goal. This is the basic idea. So now we're in a position to understand Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on the harmony of religions. Let's begin by focusing on one of his most important teachings. Many of you are probably familiar with a book called The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. The original Bengali title is Sri Sri Ramakrishna Kathamrita in Bangla, written by Medhananda Gupta. It's an invaluable spiritual document. What's amazing about it is that it's not just a collection of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, it also records in meticulous detail his daily life and how he interacted with others, what he did in the course of the day. And it's really remarkable. So if any of you have not read it, I strongly recommend that you read that book. So in this book, you'll find on almost every page, he distinguishes two stages in spiritual experience, which he calls jnana and vijnana. This is what he says about these two stages. He says, the jnani gives up his identification with worldly things, discriminating not this, neti, neti. Only then can he realize Brahman. It is like reaching the roof of a house by leaving the steps behind one by one. But the vijnani, who is more intimately acquainted with Brahman, realizes something more. He realizes that the steps are made of the same materials as the roof. Oh, sorry. Bricks, lime, and brick dust. That which is realized as Brahman through the eliminating process of not this, is then found to have become the universe and all its living beings. The Vijnani sees that the reality which is impersonal, nirguna, is also personal, saguna. This is known as Vijnana. So there's a lot to unpack here. According to Sri Ramakrishna, the Jnani is the traditional Shankarite Advaita Vedantan. I just explained that in the earlier slides. Who attains spiritual realization of the impersonal, nirguna, non-dual Brahman through the practice of Jnana Yoga, the yoga of knowledge. But Sri Ramakrishna says that's not the ultimate. There's a stage even beyond that, which he calls Vijnana. The Vijnani, after attaining Brahma Jnana, after attaining the highest goal of Advaita Vedanta, according to Shankara, he goes beyond that Advaita Jnani by realizing that same Brahman is not only impersonal, nirguna, but also personal, saguna. So one of the ways that Sri Ramakrishna would often teach this idea is he would say in Bangla, Brahma Shakti Abhed, which means Brahman, nirguna Brahman, is inseparable from Shakti, by which he means the personal God. And in another teaching, he explains this in even more detail. He says, I'll say it in Bangla first, then I'll explain it in English. He says, Jokhon tini niskriyo, tokhon ami Brahma bole koi. Jokhon tini srishti sthiti prolay koren, tokhon ami Shakti bole koi. When I talk about this ultimate reality as niskriya, as inactive, I call it Brahman. And when I think of it as creating, preserving this and destroying the universe, I call it Shakti. So that's a fundamental teaching of Sri Ramakrishna's. He taught this on the basis of his own spiritual experience of Vijnana, the realization of God as both personal and impersonal. And Sri Ramakrishna also often emphasizes that while the Advaita Jnani dismisses this entire world as a framework of illusion, the Bangla is dhokatati, the Vijnani embraces this universe as a mansion of mirth, mojarkuti, as a real manifestation of God. So you should remember from one of my earlier slides, according to Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Jagat is Mithya. In that sense, Sri Ramakrishna is saying the Advaita Jnani dismisses this world as dhokatati, as an illusion. But the Vijnani sees that because Shakti is real, the Vijnani sees that this entire world is nothing but a real manifestation of that same Shakti. Now, on the basis of his spiritual experience of Vijnana, he taught what I call the philosophy of Vijnana Vedanta. If you're interested in details, you can look at my previous book published in 2018 by Oxford called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality. I'll mention that later in the presentation. So here are three of the most important doctrines of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta philosophy. Doctrine number one, the soul reality is the infinite divine reality, which is the impersonal non-dual Brahman in one aspect, and the personal God, Shakti, in another aspect. So I just mentioned his teaching, Brahma or Shakti Abhed. That's the first doctrine. And remember, if we want to compare and contrast Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta with Shankara's Advaita Vedanta, how does this compare with Shankara's doctrine? Remember, Shankara teaches that the sole reality is the impersonal non-dual Brahman. He doesn't believe that the infinite reality has multiple aspects, one of which is impersonal, another which is personal. He believes there's only one reality, that reality is non-dual pure consciousness. Sri Ramakrishna says, no, the reality is nirguna, Shankara is correct, but it is also equally saguna. It is also Shakti. So that's an important philosophical difference between Shankaracharya and Sri Ramakrishna. Second doctrine of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta, the world, Jagat, and all individual souls, jivas, are real manifestations of Shakti. Here again, remember, how does this contrast with Shankara? Remember that according to Shankara, from the absolute standpoint, this world is not real, it's non-existent, and all of the individual souls are also ultimately non-existent. There's only non-dual pure consciousness. But according to Sri Ramakrishna, everything in this world is actually real, as a real manifestation of Shakti. Every single one of us is a real manifestation of Shakti. This diversity is real, so long as we remember that this diversity is itself a manifestation of God. That's what's important to keep in mind. And the third doctrine of Vijnana Vedanta, all four of the main sadhanas, yogas, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Raja Yoga, the yoga of meditation or concentration, are all direct paths to the goal of God realization. Each one of these leads directly to the highest goal of God realization. So I hope you can begin to see how, in contrast to Shankara's Advaita, which I call an inclusivist paradigm, because it puts Advaita Vedanta on the highest level and other religions on a bit of a lower footing, Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta is a pluralist paradigm because it puts all of the different religions and all of the different yogas on an equal footing. There's no higher and lower here, as there is in Shankara's philosophy. Now, we finally come to his Vijnana-based model of religious pluralism, his doctrine of religious pluralism. Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana-based doctrine of the impersonal, personal, infinite reality serves as the basis of his doctrine of the harmony of religions, his religious pluralism. So this is one of my favorite teachings of his. He says in Bangla, Tini Ananto, Patho Ananto. It's a very simple teaching. God is infinite, and the paths to God are infinite. So the nice thing about this teaching is that he doesn't just explain that there are infinite paths to God, he explains why there are infinite paths to God. How can there be infinite paths to God? It's because God himself, or God herself, is infinite. And because God is infinite, there are naturally infinite paths leading to God. And he illustrates the harmony of all religions from the standpoint of Vijnana by using a wonderful parable, which, as far as I'm aware, nobody had used before him. So let's look at this. He says this: once a man entered a forest and saw a small animal on a tree. He came back and told another man that he had seen a creature of a beautiful red color on a certain tree. The second man replied, when I went into the forest, I also saw that animal. But why do you call it red? It is green. Another man who was present contradicted them both and insisted that it was yellow. Presently, others arrived and contended that it was gray, violet, blue, and so forth and so on. At last, they started quarreling among themselves. To settle the dispute, they all went to the tree. They saw a man sitting under it. On being asked, he replied, yes, I live under this tree and I know the animal very well. All your descriptions are true. Sometimes it appears red, sometimes yellow, and at other times blue, violet, gray, and so forth. It is a chameleon. And sometimes it has no color at all. Now it has a color and now it has none. In like manner, one who constantly thinks of God can know God's real nature. He alone knows that God reveals himself to seekers in various forms and aspects. God is personal as well as impersonal. Only the man who lives under the tree knows that the chameleon can appear in various colors, and he knows further that the animal at times has no color at all. It is the others who suffer from the agony of futile argument. Now, sorry, I just realized why I couldn't show the animation. It's because I didn't actually play so now it should work. Anyway, so let me emphasize two aspects of this parable of the chameleon, which I think are very significant. Number one, notice that this chameleon assumes many different colors: yellow, blue, red. These different colors of the chameleon correspond to different forms of the personal God. They can be, these colors can be Krishna, Allah, Christ, Rama, various kinds of personal God. What does the colorless chameleon correspond to? Nirguna Brahman, non-dual pure consciousness. And notice that in the parable, Sri Ramakrishna does not, there's no sense in which the colorless chameleon is somehow more real or more authentic than the chameleon which is yellow or blue or red, which means that he's not putting Advaita Vedanta or Nirguna Brahman on a higher level than the theistic religion. So that's the first point I wanted to bring your attention to. And the second important point that we should learn from this parable is notice that so many of these people are coming to the chameleon and they're seeing that chameleon in a particular color, either as green or as blue or as violet or as colorless. But there's one unusual person. That unique person is the person who's sitting under the tree and sees the chameleon 24 hours a day. That person alone knows that the chameleon is all of these colors and none of these colors, which means, right, in terms of the analogy, that this person sitting under the tree represents the Vijnani, who realizes God in multiple forms and aspects, who knows that God is not just Christ, but also Allah and also Krishna and also Rama and also Kali and also Shiva. And at the same time knows that that same God is non-dual pure consciousness. So keep in mind both those aspects as we continue to think and reflect on Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. Now, here is how I would illustrate Sri Ramakrishna's pluralist paradigm for harmonizing the different world religions. Compare this, remember, to the previous diagram I gave you based on Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. So Christians, through the practice of Christianity, can go all the way to the top of the mountain. They can attain the highest goal of life. Through realizing some aspect or form of the impersonal, personal, infinite reality. And this is the highest salvation. They don't have to practice Jnana Yoga eventually and then realize non-dual pure consciousness. They attain the highest goal, which is Christian heaven. Muslims, through the practice of Islam, will directly realize some aspect or form of the impersonal, personal, infinite reality. Again, because they believe in Nirakara, but Saguna God, which means they believe in the formless, but personal God. And I should also mention here, not just Muslims, but Sikhs, the Sikh faith. They also believe in the Nirakara Saguna form of God. They'll also attain the highest salvation through their path. Hindus, theistic Hindus, those who believe in the personal God, Rama, Krishna, Kali, all of them will also attain the highest goal of salvation through their religious paths. Advaita Vedantins, through the practice of Jnana Yoga, Advaita Vedanta, they will attain what they consider to be the highest goal, which is realizing their identity with non-dual pure consciousness. They'll attain that. It's not that they will be forced to go to some kind of heaven which they're not interested in. They will realize their identity with non-dual Brahman. There's no coming and going for them. But they don't have to practice any kind of bhakti or anything. They can lead directly. They can attain the goal of salvation directly. And Buddhists likewise, this is not an exhaustive list of the world religions. I'm just giving you some examples. Buddhists also, through the practice of Buddhism, will attain the highest goal of nirvana through their path. So I hope you can see how this is a pluralist rather than an inclusivist paradigm. The main idea is that Sri Ramakrishna places the different world religions on an equal footing. He doesn't say that one religion is higher than the others. That's important to keep in mind. Now, we come to a very important difficulty, a problem. Anytime you teach that multiple world religions are equally valid, many people will raise objections. And one of the most common objections is what is called the problem of conflicting religious truth claims. This is a widely discussed problem in the philosophy of religion. I want to explain it in a very simple way. And then I'd love to hear from you. So this is the problem. If different religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, if all these different religions make conflicting claims about historical and metaphysical realities, then how can all religions be valid? This is the problem. Some examples. Did Christ die on the cross? Christians say that Christ did die on the cross. This is fundamental to their faith. Muslims say Christ did not die on the cross. I don't know how many of you are aware of that, but if you studied the Quran, they don't believe that Christ died on the cross. So these two religions conflict on this doctrine, on this question. Another example, is reincarnation true? Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Islam, Orthodox Judaism do not believe that reincarnation is true. But Hinduism, Buddhism, they believe that reincarnation is true. Again, these world religions are conflicting with each other. But if they conflict with each other, how can they all be true? How can they all be valid? But this is how I think Sri Ramakrishna would answer this difficulty, this question. Sri Ramakrishna never claimed that all of the world religions are true. He didn't say they are equally true, but that multiple religions are equally effective in leading to salvation. So this is very important to keep in mind, the difference between saying that all religions are true and all religions can lead equally to the highest goal. Notice that difference. And I'm saying that he's claiming the latter, but not the former. Let me explain this in a little bit more detail. According to Sri Ramakrishna, historical and trans-historical doctrine. So what I mean by a historical religious doctrine is something like this. As a historical fact, did Christ die on the cross? That's a historical doctrine. Christianity says yes, Islam says no. What do I mean by trans-historical doctrines? This is something like the doctrine of reincarnation. This is something that you cannot verify through some kind of through a microscope or a telescope. It's a metaphysical doctrine. Again, what Sri Ramakrishna says is that these kinds of doctrines that are conflicting in different world religions, they are not vital. They are not essential for salvation. This is what he says. That yearning, in Bangla, the term is vyakulata. That yearning is the whole thing. Whatever path you follow, whether you are a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, a Shakta, a Vaishnava, or a Brahmo. By Brahmo, he means followers of the Brahma Samaj, which was a popular movement in the 19th century. The vital point is yearning. God is our inner guide, the Antaryami. It does not matter if you take a wrong path, only you must be restless for him. God himself will put you on the right path. Besides, there are errors in all paths. Everyone thinks his watch is right, but as a matter of fact, no watch is absolutely right. But that does not hamper one's work. So the important thing to keep in mind here is, notice this beautiful watch analogy. He says, imagine that we're all wearing watches. Each one of us will think our watch tells the correct time, the perfect time, the exact time. What Sri Ramakrishna says is, in fact, none of the watches are exactly accurate, which means no world religion is 100% true at the level of doctrine. And some religions may be 95% true, other religions might be 80% true, maybe others will be 60% true. He says that's not the important thing. Whatever religion you practice, no matter how many errors there are in the religion, that religion can still take you to the highest goal, provided that you have vyakulata, longing for God, longing to attain God realization. So this is the way that Sri Ramakrishna would handle this very difficult question about conflicting truth claims. Now, but there's a nuance I wanted to just mention before closing this presentation. He adopts a different stance toward a specific kind of conflicting truth claim. And these are conflicting truth claims about the ultimate reality. So different world religions make conflicting truth claims about the nature of ultimate reality. I already mentioned, for instance, that Shankara's Advaita Vedanta holds that the ultimate reality is only impersonal, nirguna, pure consciousness. Other religions, Christianity says, no, God is personal, but formless, and also has come to this earth in the form of Jesus Christ. Allah says, no, that's not true. Jesus was not an incarnation. There's no such thing as incarnation. The ultimate reality is only saguna and nirakara, formless but personal. And there are many other Hindu faiths, for instance, which teach that God is personal, saguna and sakara, both with form and personal. So you see how all these different world religions are conflicting about the nature of ultimate reality. Now, how does Sri Ramakrishna explain these conflicting truth claims? What he says is, religious truth claims about the ultimate reality are in reality complementary rather than conflicting. These different claims about ultimate reality, they don't conflict with each other in reality. In fact, they complement each other. And he explains this complementarity through another parable, which is probably well known to many of you. It's the parable of the blind man and the elephant. Through this parable, he teaches that every religion captures a unique aspect or form of the impersonal, personal, infinite reality. But no religion captures the whole of the infinite reality. So this is the parable of the elephant. He says, Sri Ramakrishna says, one can rightly speak of God only after one has seen him. He who has seen God knows really and truly that God has form and that he is formless as well. He has many other aspects that cannot be described. Once some blind men chanced to come near an elephant. A person explained to them, this animal is an elephant. They were asked what the elephant was like. The blind men began to feel its body. One of them said the elephant was like a pillar. He had touched only its leg. Another said it was like a winnowing fan. He had touched only its ear. In this way, the others, having touched its tail or belly, gave their different versions of the elephant. Just so, a man who has seen only one aspect of God limits God to that alone. It is his conviction that God cannot be anything else. Again, just like the parable of the chameleon, notice there are two important dimensions here. Number one, all of the different blind men are touching different parts of the elephant. Each of them is correct in saying that the elephant feels just like the part of the elephant that they're touching. So it's not that they're wrong, they're correct, but they're wrong in generalizing based on their limited observation. And the second point I wanted to bring your attention to is, just like that person who's sitting under the tree 24 hours a day in the chameleon parable, the person who sees the chameleon in all the different colors, there's the person with sight here, the person who can see the whole elephant. He's the one who's not blind. Only he realizes that all of these different blind men who are touching different parts of the elephant, he can tell them, you're all right, because you're all making contact with the same ultimate reality, but you're all wrong in limiting God to only that aspect that you're touching. So again, the person who has vision, who's not blind, corresponds to Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnani, the one who has realized multiple aspects of God, and on that basis teaches the harmony of all the world religions. And I wanted to just close by mentioning 4 of the main advantages of Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana-based religious pluralist paradigm. Number 1, all of the major world religions are equally valid paths to realizing some aspect or form of one and the same impersonal, personal, infinite reality. So the importance of this is that for too long, religions at best have been condescending. But by condescending, what I mean is they'll say, no, you guys are good too. You non-Christians are good, you non-Muslims are also good, you non-Hindus are good, but you're lower than us. This higher, lower language should be removed from our vocabulary. That's my opinion, and Sri Ramakrishna really helps us move away from this higher, lower language. He gives equal validity to the different world religions. The second advantage is that since the personal God, which Sri Ramakrishna calls Shakti, and the impersonal absolute, which Sri Ramakrishna calls Brahman, Nirguna Brahman, are different but equally real aspects of one and the same infinite divine reality. Theistic and non-theistic religions are placed on an equal footing. And remember, what I mean by theistic religion are religions that believe in a personal God. And non-theistic religions are religions like Advaita Vedanta, like Buddhism, for instance. He places all of these religions on an equal footing. The third advantage, he has a very expansive, a very broad view of salvation. Instead of imposing a single, narrow goal of salvation onto all of the world religions, Ramakrishna teaches that a theist, a person who believes in the personal God, can realize a particular personal aspect or form of God, like Christ or Krishna or Allah, while an Advaitin or a Buddhist can realize the impersonal aspect of the same infinite reality. So, see, remember, if you've studied the Bible or Quran or Judaism, what you'll find is that the goal for them is going to heaven. And what Sri Ramakrishna will say, and also many of the theistic schools of Hinduism, like Vaishnavas, they also believe in going to Goloka or Vrajaloka and communing with Krishna in a higher heaven. What Sri Ramakrishna says is that's wonderful. That's the highest goal for you, and you will attain that. You don't have to go on to some higher form of salvation. That is the salvation for you. At the same time, Advaita Vedantins and Buddhists are not at all interested in going to any kind of heaven. They don't believe in the personal God. They don't believe in heaven as the highest goal. What Sri Ramakrishna says is, so then if you're an Advaita Vedantin and you practice Jnana Yoga, you won't have to go to heaven. You will realize your identity with non-dual pure consciousness. And so will the Buddhists. They will attain nirvana. So it's not that he's imposing one narrow form of salvation onto all of the different world religious practitioners. He's much broader. He says even salvation takes different forms, depending on how you practice your religion and what you're trying to attain. And finally, fourth, Sri Ramakrishna's broad conception of the impersonal, personal, infinite reality provides an ontological rationale for active interreligious dialogue. What do I mean by this? This is slightly technical, but the main idea is simple. The idea is that even if I believe that other religions, if say I'm a Hindu, even if I believe that non-Hindu religions like Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, even if I believe that they can also take us to the highest goal, I can still be indifferent to other religions. I can still say, fine, but I'm going to follow my path. Let others practice the other religions. But what Sri Ramakrishna says is, he goes further than that. He says that we should actively learn from religions other than our own. What can we learn from other religions? The idea is that by reading the Bible, by speaking to Christians, by going to church, by going to mosques, by learning about other religions other than the ones we practice, we can learn more about the infinite nature of God. So if we love God in the form of Kali, for instance, if I discuss God with Vaishnavas, then I will learn that God also manifests not only as Kali, but also as Krishna. When I speak to Advaita Vedantins, I will learn that God also has a nirguna, an impersonal aspect. So I learn more and more about God, the more I expose myself to religions other than my own. And this provides a very strong basis for interreligious dialogue, for learning from other religions, from speaking in a very respectful way with practitioners of other religions. So on that note, I'll just mention that if you're interested in a more in-depth discussion and defense of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy of religious pluralism, please read chapters 3 and 4 of my previous book, which is called Infinite Paths to Infinite Reality, Sri Ramakrishna and Cross-Cultural Philosophy of Religion, published by Oxford University Press in 2018. And I wanted to just provide a brief plug for my new book. This was just published last month by Oxford University Press. It's called Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. And in chapter 3 of this book, I discussed how Swami Vivekananda further developed Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on the harmony of religions. And if you live in India, a South Asian edition of this book will be published by Oxford University Press India by the end of May 2022, and you can purchase that through Amazon India or Flipkart. Thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you now.
Thank you, Swamiji. Thank you so much. Yeah, so we are open to questions now, please. You can unmute and just ask the question one by one. Yes. Okay.
Hers, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please, Kashi, please go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, this concept that was just described, Vijnana Vedanta, is very interesting. The question is, how many people do truly realize the teachings of Ramakrishna, and of course, enhanced by Swami Vivekananda with the experience of Swamiji's. Of course, the books have been published, but how many people truly understand this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So very few is the answer. But I would say I would give the same answer to if you ask the question, how many people have realized Advaita Vedanta? If you look at, there are what, 7-8 billion people in this world, how many among them have realized? So very, very few people realize God in general. Even among those who realize God, even fewer, even a smaller minority realize the state of Vijnana. According to Sri Ramakrishna, he distinguished two different types of soul. And in Bangla, he says Jeev Koti and Ishwar Koti, Ishvara Koti and Jiva Koti. And he says Jiva Kotis, after attaining Nirvikalpa Samadhi and realizing their identity with non-dual pure consciousness, they leave their body within 21 days, just for lack of food. And then he says, but there's a special category of soul, which he calls Ishvara Koti. And he defines Ishvara Koti as avatar ba avatared angsho, avatars, incarnations of God, and amshas of incarnations, portions of a divine incarnation, like Vivekananda, like Chaitanya's Parshad, the people who accompanied Chaitanya Dev, for instance. These people alone, apparently, according to Sri Ramakrishna, can attain the state of Vijnana. However, there seem to be exceptions. And I wanted to mention one example. For instance, one of Sri Ramakrishna's monastic disciples, his name was Swami Shivananda. Even among his direct disciples, Sri Ramakrishna only named about 6 of them as Ishvara Kotis, which means there are a lot of his disciples who were not named Ishvara Kotis. And so Shivananda ji, one of the great monastic disciples of our order, he became president of our order. And he wrote a letter to one of his, I believe his Guru Bhais, his brother monks. And he said, Sri Ramakrishna did not give me the Ishvara Koti chaprash in Bangla, the stamp of Ishvara Koti. But by his grace, I've been elevated to the status of Ishvara Koti. It's very interesting. So these categories of Jiva Koti and Ishvara Koti may not be as rigid as Sri Ramakrishna sometimes may make it seem. It's not as if, oh, I'm not an incarnation, so I cannot attain Vijnana. By God's grace, anything is possible. So that's a sort of medium-sized answer to your question. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
First, can I ask a small question?
Yeah, there is already one question. Let me just take thereafter, Vijay, you can, Vinod, you can. So Swamiji, there's a question from Radhika, and she asks that is Hinduism a religion or a practice? Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Why can I say it's both? I mean, depends on what you mean in the context, and Hinduism is certainly a religion, and that it's a religion that contains and embraces multiple practices. I mentioned 4 of the main yogas: Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, but there are many more yogas also. And the beauty of Hinduism is that it embraces all of them and says that through any of these spiritual technologies, through any of these yogas, you can attain one and the same goal. So I think that's a short answer to your question.
Yeah, thank you. I hope Radhika got the answer. Yeah, Vinod, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Swamiji, for your focus discourse on Swami Ramakrishna Paramahansa. I have one small, what is your view on reincarnation? Can you little bit elaborate on that?
Okay, so reincarnation, I believe in reincarnation. I believe I came to this world many times before. I probably married, which is why, fortunately, I didn't have to marry in this life. And we are reborn into particular circumstances because of our previous karma. So reincarnation is also linked to this doctrine of karma. The basic idea behind karma is everything we do and everything we think has a karmic effect, either good or bad. And so if we do bad things or if we think bad thoughts, that will have an effect in the future, and it will actually affect our future births. And in our final life, when we actually attain God realization, we will no longer have to come back to this world, and we won't have to be reborn again. Then you might ask, well, what is your evidence for believing in rebirth? There are a number of different sources of evidence. One of them, which is a very traditional one, you'll find this in texts like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. What Patanjali says is yogis who are spiritually evolved and who have done certain sadhanas can directly attain knowledge of their own past lives by concentrating on their purva janma samskaras. We have all had many lives in the past, and everything we've done in those previous lives are stored in our unconscious in the form of samskaras. And through particular spiritual discipline, by concentrating on those purva janma samskaras, we can actually attain knowledge of our past lives. Swami Vivekananda, for instance, Sri Ramakrishna claimed to have knowledge of their own past lives. That's one source of evidence. You might say, well, why should we believe in these yogic powers? Fine. There's a second source of evidence, which is even more interesting for skeptical modern minds. This is a burgeoning literature, a growing source of literature on children born in cultures that don't believe in reincarnation. For instance, young American children who at the age of 4 or 5 or 2, or the moment they can learn to speak, they suddenly say things, really weird things. Like there's one case of a guy, of a very young boy at the age of 4 or 5, in his crib or in his bed, he starts crying. He would have nightmares in the middle of the night and saying plane burning, plane crashing. And then the parents became frightened. They said, what are you talking about? And he said, no, my plane. They said, what plane? He said, Natoma. And he gives the name of the plane. He gives the name of his co-pilot. He gives the name of the aircraft carrier that he belonged to. And his parents did research on this. They looked up the names of the planes, the names of the people. He said, my name is so-and-so, Jack or something. They found out that he's the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. This is one, there are many, many examples of this. 2 of the people who have done rigorous research on this are Ian Stevenson and then his disciple named Jim Tucker. They were both at the University of Virginia. Jim Tucker is still publishing books. There are countless cases of people in countries throughout the world, many countries where reincarnation is not even a doctrine, where the family doesn't believe in reincarnation, but their child somehow seems to have past life memories, which they're haunted by. And then these parents do independent investigation, other people do independent investigation, they find out that these are actually true, that these facts are true. So that's another very interesting source of evidence. And again, I can say more, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Swami.
Thank you, Swamiji. We have another question from Shiva, and he says that objective of all human endeavor has to be realization of the self, Brahma. Therefore, all this justification of all paths leading to God is to actually appease human ego to prevent conflict and not necessarily to reach the ultimate reality. Is this true?
Yeah, so this is a good example. The questioner's viewpoint is a good example of what I call Advaitic inclusivism. The idea that the highest goal is realization of itself. And all this talk of harmony of religions is just to kind of satisfy other people's egos, but it's not really true. And the truth is Advaita is the highest, other religions are lower. I'm saying this is exactly not true. This is not Sri Ramakrishna's view, and this is not what I agree with. That's not why I became a monk of the Ramakrishna order, because I did not become a monk of the order to put down other religions and to say that you're good, but you're not as good as I am. I don't want to be condescending, and I don't want to say that other religions are lower than mine. I believe that all religions are on equal footing, and that's what Sri Ramakrishna believed, according to my interpretation. Thank you.
Yeah, Swami, namaskar. I have one very small question. It is generally said, when the soul leaves the body of a person, it is still in the closer vicinity of family and the atmosphere, and it chooses a place where it has to go, or it is predetermined where the soul has to go. So when you think of it, when you are in grief, or when you are in that mourning period, or you keep worrying about the responsibilities that you have left, and all that has to be done, does it worry the soul? Does it bother the soul before it enters into a new body? What is the philosophy? I know about the reincarnation you just mentioned. There is a book by Many Lives, Many Masters by Dr. Brian Weiss. He talks about it. He has treated many patients by hypnotics and traced many previous births of the individuals. They have in various forms, in various places. But all this does get correlated, and is it being accepted into the modern medicine in the West?
Okay, but I think others will agree with me. I think I had trouble understanding your question because your connection is not good. Is that correct? So I only understood maybe 20% of your question. You mentioned a book, Many Lives, Many Masters by Brian Weiss, which was excellent. I've read the book, and I strongly recommend the book to all of you. It's a book actually that I read when I was in training center in Biluma. Our library and training center it's full of spiritual books in different traditions, and that was a really interesting book. That book is about a particular case study. There's Brian Weiss is a psychiatrist, and he didn't believe in past lives. He didn't believe in past life hypnosis, hypnotic regression, but he met one particular patient, and suddenly in the course of their therapy sessions, she suddenly started talking as if she was from a much earlier period. And then he started exploring that further. And then by accident, he kind of regressed her to a whole series of past lives. And he ended up corroborating some of the evidence that she mentioned. And one of the most striking things about that book is that he talks during these sessions. Oh, there's some feedback. I don't know. Can somebody turn off their speakers, because I think there's feedback. I'm hearing my own voice coming back to me. Okay, I think it's better now. Yeah. So the other interesting thing is sometimes during these sessions, that patient would suddenly adopt a lower tone of voice and start speaking in a completely different, with a completely different personality. And it was very eerie because she's a young 20-year-old American woman, and suddenly she starts speaking like she's like a wise old man. And he finds out by speaking to this voice that this is the voice of some kind of, he calls them masters. That's why he calls them Many Lives, Many Masters. The idea is that these are spiritually evolved souls who are not in this earth, but are on higher planes of existence. And they guide the souls after leaving the bodies. After we leave our bodies here on earth, each one of us, I don't know if it's not that specific, but many of us are appointed a particular master who kind of gives us advice and guidance. And this master is teaching him through this American lady. So anyway, I strongly recommend that you read the book. It's very interesting, but this again is another source of evidence, the evidence from past life hypnotic regressions. from people who were strong atheists and who didn't believe in the idea of rebirth, who became converted to the standpoint of rebirth after encountering these extraordinary people and these extraordinary experiences. I hope that, I didn't understand your question fully, but I hope that at least gives some information. Thank you.
Yeah.
Second part was when the soul leaves the body. So it is in a transition, and it is said that it is in the closer vicinity of the family. Watching the family, they are believing they are going through a quite a terrible time, and maybe the family says, wish he could have lived longer, he could have done this job, he could have done this job. Does this trouble the soul when it goes and enters into another body? How this philosophy, I mean, I have read it, I have heard it, but then do you have any explanation to this?
Yeah, again, your connection is not good. So I probably understood 50% of the question. But I think you said something like when if you belong to a family, if you have a spouse and you have children and you suddenly die, does the soul, after leaving the body, feel guilty about leaving behind a suffering family? Is that the question? I didn't understand what you said. I know, but again, your connection is not going to be good. So it's becoming a bit silly. I think we should, please don't mind, but I think we should move on because your connection is not good. Yeah, thank you.
Ashok, you can type your question if you want. Yeah. Swamiji,
that'll be better.
There's a quick question from Kamlesh, and he says, what happens to Purusha after moksha?
Yeah, I mean, Purusha is, it depends on what you mean by Purusha, actually, because it's not a term that's used very frequently in Vedanta. It's a term used in Sankhya and yoga philosophy. Do you mean Atman or Jivatma, or do you mean Paramatma, or what exactly?
Kamlesh?
No, actually, there was somebody else put that thing after I put it. I wanted to ask a quick question to Swamiji that, you also mentioned good deeds and stuff. Who defines them? Because sometimes I feel it is in the eye of the beholder. What I feel is good, somebody else may not approve. And of course, there are ample evidence of that people have different way of looking at things. So is there an absolute good and absolute bad?
Yeah, it's a nice question. I mean, the opposite view is something called moral relativism. The idea that there is no objective good and objective bad. There's just different viewpoints. I wouldn't go that far, and I don't think Indian spiritual traditions go that far. I think there's a very simple way of defining a good action and a bad action. Good actions are those that take us Godward. Bad actions are actions that take us away from God. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Sundar, you asked that question.
Hi, this is Sundar here.
Yeah, Sundar.
Yeah, thanks, Harsh. Just trying to understand, my context to Purusha was consciousness and the soul. So, because after moksha, there's no reincarnation. So, what exactly happens? Because I hear that it goes and joins the infinite pool. And Purusha still has a lot of knowledge which has been accumulated. So what exactly happens?
Yeah. So if you're interested, I gave a lecture here in the Mysore Ashrama, I think last year. It's called Eating Sugar or Becoming Sugar. And I discussed this issue. And the idea is, Sri Ramakrishna in many places, he says, Bhaktora chini hote chai na, Bhaktora chini khete chai. Bhaktas do not want to become sugar, they want to eat sugar. The idea is that, I mentioned this at the end of my presentation, but the idea is fairly simple. The idea is that salvation takes different forms for different sadhakas. If you are an Advaita Vedantin and the goal of your practice is to realize your identity with non-dual pure consciousness, when you attain that goal, there won't be any heaven. There's not going to be any knowledge. Knowledge itself, you're talking about knowledge, but that's not Advaita Vedanta. It's not knowledge. Knowledge implies a knower. That's already duality. But Advaita Vedanta says it's like Sri Ramakrishna gives a nice example. He says, Nuner putul, shomudur mapta gelo. The moment it touched the water, it melted away. There's a salt doll which went to measure the depth of the ocean. The moment it set foot in the ocean, it melted in the ocean. That's salvation according to Advaita Vedanta. There's no longer a knower. There's no longer any individual soul. There's just Brahman. And there's no coming and going. There's no heaven. But if you're a believer in the personal God and you've attained the highest goal of your theistic religion, whether that's Christianity or Islam or Judaism or Vaishnavism or Shaktism, any of these, the goal for you is eating sugar, not becoming sugar. So what happens to you? It's a totally different kind of status than the Advaita. What happens is you go to Vrajaloka, or for Ramakrishna devotees, you go to Ramakrishna Loka, or for Christians, you go to the Christian heaven, or for Allah, or for Islam, for Muslims, you go to the Islamic heaven, and you commune as an individual, as a perfected individual soul with the personal God in the form that you love, whether it's Christ or Allah or Krishna, and you're in an eternal loving relationship. You might be serving God, you might be worshiping God in this higher heaven. And Sri Ramakrishna never says that the Advaitic form of salvation is higher than this theistic form of salvation. He never says that heaven is a mere stepping stone toward realization of your true nature as non-dual Brahman. And to give you specific evidence for this, anybody who has studied the Kathamrita will know this. There was one staunch Advaita Vedanta named Mohima Chakraborty, who once came to Sri Ramakrishna and he said, Bhaktaro kintu nirvan chai. He says, but bhaktas also ultimately have to attain Advaitic nirvana. This is like the previous questioner, the inclusivist Advaitan who asked me the question about isn't the highest goal realization. This is exactly what Mohima Chakraborty asked Sri Ramakrishna. And what did Sri Ramakrishna say? He says, na tanoi, ek mata ache nitya Krishna nitya bhakto, chinmoy sham chinmoy dham. He says, in theistic religions, you have this idea of nitya Krishna nitya bhakta. There's an eternal personal God and there's an eternal bhakta. In this higher heaven, this loka, Vraja Loka, Goloka, Ramakrishna Loka, whatever you want to call it. And that's their goal. And he says, Chinmoy Sham Chinmoy Dham, which means Krishna is Chinmoy. He is itself consciousness embodied. And Chinmoy Dham, that heaven, don't think this is some kind of temporary heaven or like it's some kind of like a house made of brick and mortar. It's a spiritual heaven. It's made of consciousness, pure consciousness. So he says, don't think that the Advaitic goal is higher than heaven. They're both on an equal footing. It's a matter of temperament. Thank you.